And first of all, I want to express my gratitude to the Army and Navy Club for the fantastic opportunity to host our briefing in prestigious establishment, gorgeous room, and convenient location. So, our organization, Link Community, was formed to promote religious freedom in response to challenges in Central Asia. De facto, our group was started working in Central Asia since 2010, but the organization was formally incorporated in 2017. I recall my initial trips to Washington, D.C. in 2010 and 2011, where I presented reports and detailed instances of religious persecution to the US government officials engaged in international religious freedom work. During these visits, I also participated in the civil society initiated IRF Roundtable, the one that we still have and had historical gathering today, just an hour ago, and passionately led several campaigns that adopted name, blame, and shame approach. Applying shame and blame strategies consistently left a gap. Usually the next step was elusive, with no further strategy to prevent the offenses of being repeated, resulting in dissonant reaction and resentment toward what occurred in the encounter. One of the campaigns that I organized was seeking the release of pastor from jail. The pastor was released, but because there was no change of mind among government officials, they simply changed the tactic and started arresting more. I just recently discussed with the religious freedom advocate the old case of religious minority leader who was arrested on trumped-up charges and later released because of international pressure. She was very happy remembering this success, and I was too. However, I asked her a question. Do you think the law enforcement officers who fabricated the case tortured that person and planned to scare and control tiny religious minority community will not do it again if circumstances allow it? She and I agreed that yes, it might happen again at some point, because there was no change of mind, change of perception. In 2011, I met Chris Seipel, today's panelist and well-known religious freedom thinker and expert at Union Station in Washington, D.C. to discuss the persecution of evangelical church in Central Asia. Chris asked me, do you have a strategy to reverse the trend? And I admitted that I didn't. All I knew at that time was to apply pressure and more pressure on those countries that committed violations of religious freedom. Chris encouraged me to consider strategies to build relationships with the government, civil societies, and religious communities, majorities and minorities, similar to what was already working under his leadership in Vietnam, Pakistan, and soon Uzbekistan. In his recent article describing religious freedom advocates and builders, Chris wrote, in many ways, the international religious freedom movement today is better organized and resourced than ever. Yet, the actual state of religious freedom globally continues to worsen each year. There is an urgent need to identify and overcome obstacles to greater effectiveness in the movement. This is how I got involved in what we call now religious freedom building. That is why the organization we found called Love Your Neighbor Community, or LINK. Today, as our approach to advancing religious freedom and social cohesion found fertile ground in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, we would like to inform you, dear guests, not only the outcomes of our recent assessment trip to Uzbekistan, but also show you the model to advance religious freedom and social cohesion that works and bear incredible results. So let me now introduce our first panel for today's briefing. And last week we participated with the panelists in a trip to Uzbekistan, including myself. We came just on Thursday. We spent 8 days traveling through the country to assess religious freedom and live and lives of religious communities. It was very interesting, in many cases, eye-opening trip, and you will hear the details of it very soon. But before we proceed with the panel discussion, I have a distinct pleasure to introduce a very special guest, the original inspiration for our group enlightenment journey to Uzbekistan, and the person who laid out the vision. This is my honor to give the floor to the esteemed ambassador of the Republic of Uzbekistan to the United States, His Excellency Furqat Siddiqov. Mr. Ambassador.
Dear friends, the President of the Institute for Global Engagement, led by President Rashid Ali, Nadim Meneza, Mr. Kuzer, dear friends, assalamu alaikum. It's a great honor and privilege to be here today with you, because this is a very important event, it's very important in Uzbekistan. This visit was initiated by Embassy of Uzbekistan for tourism. I don't want to take more time, but I will explain why we initiated that. First of all, as you know that under the leadership of the President of Uzbekistan, we conducted massive democratic social economic reforms. And one of the important part of that is human rights issues and religious freedom issues. This is very important issue for us. Second, we have comprehensive, open, constructive dialogue with the United States. This visit was possible because of that. We have a good, comprehensive, open dialogue with the United States. There are no any issues which we cannot talk. There are no any issues which we cannot discuss. Religious freedom issue is very important for us. As you know that Uzbekistan, biggest country by population, and in Uzbekistan we more than 35 million people represents all different religious confessions. To keep in the religious tolerance, good neighborhood is now first priority of the present policy in Uzbekistan. So for us, I would like to explain what importance in that we're doing these reforms, and the religious freedom issues are very important, and we're making the reforms on these areas not to please someone. We're doing this for our nation, we're doing it for ourselves, because now we're building New Uzbekistan. We believe that we can build New Uzbekistan, which will have strong economy, strong civil society, if we will have good governance, if we will have the religious tolerance, if we will have democratic society, Uzbekistan, New Uzbekistan will be more successful. So this visit was very important for us. I would like to tell you that yes, we're a young country, we're a young democracy. Of course there is some issues, of course there is some problems, it's natural, but our approach is different. I'm ambassador of Uzbekistan to the United States. It's my third mission to US. I used to be here more than 10 years in two missions. I started as a press attaché, where I met President Obama. So let me say that if, like 7 or 10 years back, if somebody tell me, as I said that Uzbek embassy will initiate the visit of the religious people to travel to Uzbekistan, I could say that no, it's not going to happen. But now, I am ambassador. I asked Chris Cycle to organize team and to establish a team and go to Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan was open. They visited everywhere. They had all meetings. So now I'm thinking maybe we could have and we should have this kind of meeting maybe annual every year to follow up on the results. We are ready to talk. We're ready to talk to you. We're ready to discuss with you all issues again. We are open to talking, and last year I'm very happy to see Suleyman here too. So I officially invited the representative of Religious Commission to pay visit to Uzbekistan. I will be happy to organize the visit to Uzbekistan. And I will be happy to organize your team and Suleyman to Uzbekistan again. We're open for dialogue. Please come to Uzbekistan. I don't know when last time the Religious Commission team came to Uzbekistan. So please, we will be happy to organize your visit. Why? We believe that dialogue is the best way to find out the solution. We believe that dialogue is the best way to establish good and constructive cooperation. We already have the result of that. I would like to say thank you to the State Department. I would like to say thank you to Religious Commission, Usurf, because last year we had a lot of visits. Many Uzbek delegation came to Washington, and American delegation visited to Uzbekistan, and Suleyman visited to Uzbekistan. So I think the best way to talk to each other. Again, there's no any single issues we cannot discuss, and I believe that there's no any single issues which we cannot find out the way and compromise. So thanks so much. Uzbekistan is open. We will be happy to have any visits we would like to discuss. Yes, there will be some issues which we can solve immediately, which we are doing already. I gave you some numbers, for example, that right now in Uzbekistan, we registered more than 2,600 religious organizations, which are very new for Uzbekistan. Again, there will be some issues, maybe it will take time. And why we need a dialogue? Because this religious freedom issues are new for us. We need more discussion, we need more trainings, maybe. We need exchanging the trainings program, we have to exchange the delegation. And we, Uzbekistan, we can share a lot of things with you too. Because, in Uzbekistan, we're doing some great steps in the last 7 years. We did done a lot of things, and we got now some experience. We're ready to share with others how we reach it, how we done it. Again, all success we did done in Uzbekistan, first because of the policy of President of Uzbekistan, second because of the good constructive dialogue with our partners, first of all with the United States. Thanks so much.
And I would like to call up front and introduce our first panel that will discuss the foundings of our recent trip, Dr. Precycle, Dr. Mohammed El-Senussi, Ms. Nadine Mayenza will be virtually with us, and I will also join the panel.
We'll talk about all this in a second, but the panel is the delegation that we took to Uzbekistan for 10 days at the invitation of the government of Uzbekistan. On that delegation, besides myself, was Wade, Dr. Mohammed El-Senussi, whose PhD is in Islamic jurisprudence, and he speaks Arabic, so we could talk to the Imams, and Nadine Mainza, former chair of U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, who will join us by pre-recorded video. So I'm going to open this up and talk about things, and then we'll go through the panel or through the delegation members, and then we'll have some question and answers. Hopefully some answers. I first want to start by saying thank you to Furqat, Ambassador Furqat Siddiqov. On October 5th, he invited me over to lunch to the embassy. And we were talking, and he said, how about if you lead a delegation? And I said, where? To Uzbekistan. Look, you go to Uzbekistan, and if you form and lead a delegation, you can go anywhere you want, ask any question that you want, and speak to whomever you want. And the Uzbek government will cover all costs, to include travel to and from Uzbekistan. And right away I knew that we were talking about a new model of building religious freedom. My first time in Uzbekistan was 24 years ago. I was in Uzbekistan at the end of August, beginning of September in the year 2000. I was there to begin my research on my PhD, U.S.-Uzbekistan relations. And I will never forget being there because the city was filled with barricades. And it was filled with barricades because there were insurgents infiltrating from Afghanistan, then under control of the first Taliban, called the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan. Armed extremists who had grown up in the first part of the 90s with their form of Islam that called for an Islamic state, what we would recognize now as an ISIS state in Uzbekistan. And I'll never forget that because the country was 9 years old. What was its context for even thinking about these things except that it had to defend itself? It was also at that time that I was assessing whether and how a newly formed organization in that same year, year 2000, could work in Uzbekistan. That organization was the Institute for Global Engagement, which was founded by my parents, Margaret Ann, and my dad, Bob Seipel, who stepped down from being the first ever U.S. ambassador at large for international religious freedom in September of 2000. I was trying to think that through. Later, I'd become the president of the Institute for Global Engagement, and I would begin to figure out my way of engaging the world, which is what Uzbekistan taught me. To use relational diplomacy, to engage top-down with government officials, bottom-up with grassroots civil society, always at the invitation of the host nation. And most importantly, not looking at religious freedom as a single issue. Looking at religious freedom in the whole context of the society that I was visiting. And in most of the countries that I work in, countries in transition, security and religion go hand in glove. They have to be thought about together. So I left IGE, Institute for Global Engagement, in 2016. IG continues to work with Uzbekistan in 2018, coming alongside the new reforms of President Mirziyoyev. An MOU was signed in September 18th, 2018, and laid out a roadmap of activities, the foremost of which was a delegation of 40 rabbis, imams, and pastors coming from America, different cities, to do certificate programs in Uzbekistan, equipping citizens on religion and rule of law, on cross-cultural religious literacy, on relationship building between and among religious leaders. And then we honed and refined that and did it again in May of 22 through a thing that we called the Dialogue of Declarations, which resulted in the Bukhara Declaration. All of this at the initiative of the government of Uzbekistan. During my time at IGE, and I want to frame the larger context here, Boyd made mention to it, I began to think about, there's different philosophies, there's two main philosophies for advancing religious freedom in the world. Freedom of conscience or belief. One is advocating, and it's great. That's usually outside in with recommendations, and usually from a single issue of religious freedom. We absolutely need that. The other is building religious freedom, which is working from the inside out, coming alongside the best intentions of the culture and the government, the best of who they already are, and understanding that it is sometimes 2 steps forward and 1 step back. We'll get to what we're going to talk about in a moment, but I want you to understand why I think that this trip was so important. It's about the model that's been established. A delegation of US experts from American civil society, paid for by the Uzbek government, not paid to us directly, but logistical costs paid, went on its own to make its own independent assessment. Not the US government appointed Usurf Commission with its mandate to do certain things in a certain way, or the US IRF Department, International Religious Freedom Department, State Department. It was all of us together thinking about religious freedom and its relationship to security, which was the mandate that Ambassador Siddiqos gave us, and examining it holistically. That's important. That is a model for the future that I think we will see more and more of. Now, regarding our independent assessment, I want to say a couple things. One, we're not going to go deep on any one issue. We tried to see the whole, so we're going to report on the whole. And I should also say that what we say today has not been communicated to Ambassador Siddiqov. This is the first time he's hearing it. He didn't get a first look at it. It's an independent assessment. Uzbekistan is open for discussions. So we're going to talk about all these things at once. During our 9 days there, we haven't really fully counted it up yet because we still have jet lag. We got back 4 days ago. But we did around 50 interviews with government officials, with religious leaders, with government in the room, with government not in the room, Shia, Sunni, Pentecostal, Jehovah's Witness, evangelical, Buddhist, all of the above. We met with everybody. And they had one conclusion. They had two conclusions, really. And we did this, by the way, all over the country. We went to Fergana, we went to Bukhara, we went to Termez, we went to Nakus. If you're familiar with your Uzbekistan, that's basically the four corners of Uzbekistan. And Tashkent, of course. And every single interview, even when the government was not in the room with human rights activists, they all agree on one thing. It's night and day. Today versus the previous administration under the previous president. It is incomparably better than it was before. Absolutely. Most of them would also say this, though, that there are areas for improvement in religious freedom. Areas that, if these were improved, would enhance Uzbekistan's security as a state and for its citizens. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk about the security context, the holistic context, and then I'm going to give it to Wade and the rest of our delegation. We're talking basically about three mores. Wade's going to talk about, okay, what do people really say about there's more religious freedom? What does that mean? Nadine, by video, is going to talk about we need more clarity. If we're going to have more security and more stability, we need more clarity on prisons and prisoners, on definitions of extremism, on registration, on definitions of missionary activity. And then Mohammed is going to talk about if there's going to be more social cohesion, then we need more multi-faith collaboration within Uzbekistan, but also between Uzbekistan and America in the context of the bilateral relationship. We need more of those partnerships on, you name it, to build greater religious freedom, because the more religious groups participate in any issue, you pick the issue from the environment to extremism, the better it is for religious freedom, because they're bringing their values to the table. Okay, so let me give you the context, historical and security. And I say this broadly, and I say it with respect, I don't mean it ugly, but these are the kinds of things that don't generally show up in a state or an agency of a state religious freedom report. They don't generally show up in an NGO's report on human rights or religious freedom in Uzbekistan. But it's there all the time. It's how Uzbeks think, and that's what I want to talk about. Okay, 160 years ago, this is all in 10 minutes or less, so you can't afford not to listen. 160 years ago, Russian government, Russian Empire incorporates Central Asia. They think of them as savages, and they introduced the idea of a Muslim spiritual assembly board, essentially a muftiyat, which is still in Uzbekistan today. Introduces religious regulation, forcibly included. Russian Empire goes down 1917, Bolsheviks come in, atheism, communism, repression of religion, but the only expression that there was regulated through a thing called the Committee on Religious Affairs. It's a Soviet mechanism. If you go to Vietnam and Laos today, like I do, or China, there's a version of this, if not the exact same name. That's the way these societies have worked. That's how they thought about religion. It is always regulated in Asia. Even Indonesia, there's a Ministry of Religion in the largest Muslim majority democracy in the world. Okay. Fall of Soviet Union comes, and there's a lot of religious freedom because it's not regulated and everybody's thinking about my form of Islam in particular. And with that comes extremism. And when they threaten to form an ISIS state like Islamic movement in Uzbekistan, that's when the government cracks down. That's the only thing they know how to do. I'm not exonerating that. I'm not excusing it. I'm seeking to explain it. So that was the way of life until the new president. President Mirziyoyev, who comes in at the end of 2016, gets settled and begins implementing reforms by the beginning of 2018. So what I want to emphasize here is we are reflecting not on a 33-year-old country. We are reflecting on a 6-year reform process with citizens in a government that has never had experience with an unregulated religious space. Never, ever. A space that the Uzbek government has invited us to speak into and participate in. It's remarkable. So what's the security context? Uzbekistan, as I'm sure you know, is a double landlocked country. What does that mean, Chris? It's surrounded by landlocked countries. Why is that important? They can't get their goods to the sea. Our global economy, our global GDP is 86 trillion. 70% of that is on ships. Uzbekistan doesn't have access to it. There's between 35 and 38 million Uzbeks. 65% of them are under the age of 35. That's roughly 25 million people under the age of 35. The economy is growing at 5.5% a year, projected to grow that way for the next 2 years. But it's not good enough. President Mirziyoyev recently said to his deputy prime minister, get the GDP in gear. You got to start producing or I'm going to find somebody who can by the end of the next quarter. Why is he saying that? They got to generate jobs. They got to generate jobs. What's proof of that? There are 2.9 million Uzbeks working in Russia. And if you take the conservative estimate of 3 family members in Uzbekistan dependent on the money made in Russia, that's 1/3 of the population of Uzbekistan depending on Russia for some form of means to make ends meet. All of this, of course, takes place essentially in a Russian information sphere. Most news is received from Russian sources. And Russian journalists are not exactly known for integrity. Indeed, most the Uzbek citizens that are radicalized, most of them are radicalized in Russia. Now, a month before we arrived, on December 20th, a guy who's a Russian novelist who now has his own party and he's good friends with President Putin, he made the case that Russia should re-annex Central Asia. I'm not making this up. Here's what he said. I am actually sincerely advocating that these territories from where migrant workers come to us should be annexed and taught the Russian language on the spot. Not here, but there in Uzbekistan, for example. Since 2 million of your citizens are on our territory, we claim your territory. This is said in the public sphere, a friend of President Putin's. Why can't we do this? Because who forbids us, Russia, to do anything in Eurasia after the parade in Kyiv? No one. Okay. Is that crazy talk, Chris? The Russians, after all, just let Azerbaijan walk all over their longtime ally, Armenia. The Armenian enclave in Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, was taken over by Azerbaijan. Russia must be weak. On the other hand, if Russia wins the war, or if there's a ceasefire, they are more likely to redeploy their forces. And how do you think the invasion of Ukraine took place in the first place? It was socialized through the media and people like this saying we should do it. Until there's popularity for President Putin doing it, like Crimea, like Donbass in 2014, like the attacks in February of 2022. We think it's crazy that he would attack Central Asia. That's what we thought about Ukraine. I'm not trying to be melodramatic, I'm just trying to be realistic about how we think about our world's geopolitics right now. Okay, so what about the South? Well, they have 2 Islamist regimes to the south. There's Iran, funding terrorism worldwide, the 3 H's, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, disrupting global trade, seaborne trade. And then there's the Taliban, not exactly a democracy. But even the Taliban doesn't control all of their territory. They've got 5,000 trigger pullers called ISIS-K, ISIS Khorasan. And those ideologies are coming across the border. And some of this gets replayed out in the public sometimes. There have been protests, like in March of 2021, where there were people chanting Allah Akbar. And the response of the government is to think, where's this coming from? Is it the internet? Is it from Russia? Is it from ISIS-K? Is it from the Taliban? And of course, if you're a government official, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about September 2000 when the barricades were up and the IMU was infiltrating from Afghanistan. That's the security context. Finally, there's China. China is 21% of Uzbekistan's trade. As we left on January 25th, President Mirziyoyev signed an agreement with President Xi to upgrade the relationship to an all-weather strategic partnership. That's the same relationship that China has with Pakistan. And as they were leaving, President Xi said to President Mirziyoyev, we got to get the railroad built between our countries for more trade through Kyrgyzstan. That's something the US should support, to have that trade and more jobs created. Okay, here's the bottom line. It's a complicated neighborhood. It's a tough neighborhood. They control what they can control. They've been trying to regionally integrate among the 5 stands. President Mirziyoyev and President Tokayev have been working on this, which, if you know anything about Central Asia, has not been a natural thing. But these presidents are working on it, trying to be a buffer against all of these things: nuclear powers, extremism, radicalization, disinformation from Russia. They're working together on what they can control. But the security space is complicated, it's opaque, it's multi-tiered, and there are factors beyond Uzbekistan's control. All of this informs how the government thinks about, describes, discusses, engages, and advances religious freedom. And with that, I'm going to give the floor to Wade.
With religious community leaders about what they think regarding the recent reforms, and the question was very simple. If you compare 2016 and 2023, what would be your conclusion? And again, it's not an exaggeration. Everyone, literally everyone, told us it was the night and day. Even a former prisoner of conscience, religious prisoner who was convicted under the Karimov policies, was later released. Now his Shia mosque was registered, and we had a conversation without any government around. It was a very honest conversation with him. Even he said, oh no, you cannot compare what was before and what it is now. I remember myself working to the small Pentecostal church in Andijan. And with the 2 government officials, we entered this church, and first what Pastor did, he presented 2 Bibles in Uzbek language to both of the government officials that came with me. Unthinkable in 2016. We later were sitting in his office, and his office was facing the congregation. It was Sunday. And he said, where are we sitting now? There were 2 police officers sitting each Sunday here at this place, observing our services and intimidating people who were coming to our church. We didn't see him for many years, with them for many years. There were translations of the sermon, of the Christian sermon, from Russian to Uzbek, unthinkable in 2016. And so on and so forth. Muslims were telling us stories about opportunity to bring and educate their kids, unthinkable under the previous administration. Buddhists told us about the freedom to have their own monk and study their own religion, confessing that under the Soviet Union they recognized themselves as a Buddhists, but never understood the practices until they had the opportunity to have their own monk from South Korea who came and started to teach them and explain them their religion. I believe some of these stories will be included into this report, but we definitely can consider that and understand how local people think about what's going on in their country and how they percept the influence of the recent reforms. Thank you. Okay. Nazima Yenza will be virtually with the pre-recorded video. And her topic will be the areas that needs to be improved in Uzbekistan, again from our research. Please.
My name is Nadine Mayans, and I'm the president of Usurf Secretariat and board chair of the Institute for Global Engagement. I'm also the former chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or Usurf. I'm disappointed that I won't be able to join you in person due to a long-standing commitment, but I'm glad to share with you about our recent trip to Uzbekistan. First, it was such an honor to be a part of this delegation led by Dr. Chris Seipel, Ann Wade Kuzek, and Dr. Mohammed El Sanusi. I have so much respect for each of them and so enjoyed our time together. I was fortunate to lead two previous delegations to Uzbekistan as a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. The first was in 2019 as vice chair. It was one of our more productive Usurf delegations because of the authentic government engagement. When you look at this in context, one must give credit to the Institute for Global Engagement for years of engagement and the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Dr. Ahmed Shahid, for his work starting in 2017. After our visit, Uzbekistan ended up following many of our recommendations as well as those from civil society, leading to their removal as a country of particular concern, or a CPC, by the State Department. We at Usurf changed our recommendation from CPC to the special watch list. In April of 2022, I led another delegation as chair of Usurf with then Vice Chair Nuri Turkel, who had followed me as chair. It was one of my most memorable delegations. Again, we saw real engagement by the government. We were both moved by our visit with Pastor Shukrat from the Evangelical Baptist Church of Bukhara, a church that has been part of this community for 80 years. Their building could no longer be used because it had extensive water damage due to broken pipes in the neighborhood. Because it was a UNESCO protected area of the city, it could not be renovated. Since then, they have been meeting in a temporary location without water or bathrooms, so older members cannot attend, shattering this once vibrant community. Last week, our delegation was able to visit with Pastor Shukrat and learn that the government has found a suitable building that meets their needs. It is currently being renovated and will still need to go through the registration process. I can't wait to visit it once it is open. Another special place we visited in 2022 was a small Koji background Shia mosque in Bukhari, which had been closed for 8 years and taken over by the local Mahalla. Fortunately, it is now open and registered. It was wonderful seeing former prisoner of conscience Johangir Kulidjanov again, introducing him to our delegation and visiting with this community. As I've said many times while at Usurf and after, there is simply no other country that has made more progress in improving religious freedom conditions in the past decade than Uzbekistan. In a meeting with religious communities and human rights activists throughout the country, recommended by the U.S. Embassy, Usurf, and others, we heard a consistent message of improvements. Yet, based on our many conversations, there are 4 areas that could improve the security of the state, areas in which, if there was greater clarification, it would be easier for citizens to follow the law, practice their faith, and thus build social cohesion. The following are our initial suggestions regarding registration, extremism, prisoners, and missionary activity. We say initial, as based on feedback from today and our ongoing conversations, we will later issue a formal report with our recommendations. Since registration for houses of worship continues to be difficult, we recommend that the U.S. government and international religious freedom community should engage and assist the Uzbek government in simplifying the registration process for houses of worship. Current regulations remain challenging, and few non-Muslim houses of worship have met this criteria since the 1998 law on freedom of conscience and religion organizations was revised in 2021. Here are our suggestions. Number 1, issue a legal reform that clearly defines and simplifies the criteria for registering religious organizations, would ensure that the process is accessible, transparent, and non-discriminatory. A simple one-pager would be most helpful with supporting citations. Number 2, solidify recent positive changes, such as allowing non-registered groups to meet by codifying them into law, providing stability for religious groups, and preventing the possibility of a return to previous restrictive practices. Engage international experts on religious freedom to provide guidance on best practices for religious laws that respect religious diversity and international human rights standards, and consider present Uzbek government's concerns regarding growing radicalization and security challenges. A potential partner could be well-known and respected Brigham Young University International Center for Law and Religion Studies. Facilitate a dialogue between the government and registered and unregistered religious communities to understand their needs and concerns, and to work collaboratively towards mutual acceptable registration solutions. URF Secretariat will be happy to provide a strategic framework and help facilitate such dialogue. Continue monitoring the progress of the registration process and report openly on both success and areas needing improvement, maintaining a balanced and objective perspective on the situation. As Chris noted in his summary of the security situation, there are a number of reasons to be alarmed about extremism. As a result, the Uzbek authorities have intensified their control of religious communities' lives, particularly among the Muslim majority. This shift has resulted in sporadic incidents of harassment by local officials. We believe that stricter control over religious communities and harassment will not lead to enhanced security. Our initial suggestions to enhance security while upholding the principles of religious liberty are, number one, define religious extremism precisely in legal terms, ensuring that this definition is transparent and publicly available to prevent the criminalization of nonviolent religious activities. Work with local and international legal experts to differentiate between peaceful religious expression and actions that genuinely constitute a threat to security. Again, BYU International Center for Law and Religious Studies could be a potential partner. Engage in open and ongoing dialogue with all religious communities to build trust and cooperation in preventing extremism. My organization, URF Secretariat, could be a partner for this. Continuing developing comprehensive educational programs to improve cross-cultural religious literacy, focusing on the peaceful teachings of Islam and other religions to counteract extremist narratives. Get access to the best practices in the U.S. on such educational programs, especially for youth. This could include digital literacy programs that equip the youth with the skills to critically assess online religious content and recognize extremist propaganda. Current programs, in some cases, are too formal and not engaging, especially for young people. The Network for Religion and Traditional Peacemakers, of which Dr. Mohammed El-Sinisi is the executive director, could be a potential partner. The cross-cultural religious literacy model being pioneered in Indonesia by the Lamine Institute is another. Facilitate workshops and seminars that could offer alternative narratives to violent extremism, emphasizing peaceful conflict resolution and respect for pluralistic liberties. LINK is currently developing a cross-cultural religious literacy program for Kazakhstan's government and law enforcement community in partnership with the Pepperdine School for Dispute Resolution. Continue the development of networks for families and communities affected by radicalization, to include those whose wives and children have been repatriated from Syria and Iraq, whose husbands fought for ISIS. Uzbekistan has been a pioneer in the later regard, and there is much good to build on. We suggest strengthening international cooperation to address the issue of Uzbek migrant workers being radicalized abroad, ensuring their efforts to counter extremism are collaborative and cross-border. While chair at Usurf in October 2021, we released a report on prison conditions in Uzbekistan, detailing close to 2,000 religious prisoners of conscience. While we heard reports of improved prison conditions from human rights activists during our visit, there are still too many held under the Karimov era on the vague charge of extremism. In light of these findings, we recommend, first, the Uzbekistan government be transparent regarding the status and treatment of religious prisoners, especially those arrested under vague charges of extremism. Number two, we are encouraged by the government's invitation to Usurf to participate in a systematic and ongoing conversation about prisons and prisoners, in particular the invitation to discuss regular visits. Usurf should welcome and build on this opportunity. The religion law prohibits proselytizing and other missionary activities, but the definition of missionary activity is also vague. Based on our visit, we suggest the following. First, conduct a broader discussion on regular platform about missionary activity, building on the intermittent but constructive conversations thus far. Our Secretariat could be a partner. Clarify the legal definition of missionary activity and the distribution of literature to protect peaceful religious discourse and prevent the misuse of anti-proselytization laws. I conclude where I began. Uzbekistan has made tremendous strides in this sphere, something confirmed by even the harshest critics of the government. And they have done so in a complex and multi-layered security environment that religious freedom advocates should also appreciate more. We offer these suggestions to improve security and sustain the best of religious freedom. Thanks so much.
So my name is Mohammed Al-Salusi. I'm the Executive Director of the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers. I was really delighted and honored to be with my colleagues, with Chris, with Wade, with Nadine, to visiting the beautiful country of Uzbekistan. My first interaction and introduction to Uzbekistan, so I want to personalize this and give you a lot of stories. It was 2001. 2001, I was a student in Indiana University in Bloomington. And there was students from Uzbekistan was doing his master's degree. He came as a scholarship and we were in the same class. So we actually formed strong friendship. And he told me a lot about Uzbekistan, and we became friends and family friends, and go to his apartment with his wife Mu'attar and enjoy the pilaf and all of that. And they visit us as well. So Rashid Ali is his name. So that was my first introduction to Uzbekistan. And of course he went back home and he served the government, and I will tell you the rest of the story later. But my first visit to Uzbekistan, it was November 2016. It was a part of the OSCE, Organization of Security Cooperation of Europe, efforts to counter violent extremism. There was a seminar in Uzbekistan, countering violent extremism and radicalization that lead to terrorism, a community policing approach. So I was invited, before President Karimov actually took the office, I was invited to engage the Imams and law enforcement on better partnership and collaboration to countering violent extremism. It is a community engagement approach. That was in 2016. It was a completely different environment. It took us some time. It took me a day to break the ice to talk to the Imams at that time. It was not difficult, it was not an easy to have actually such a conversation, just because, you know, of the current system at the time. So that was my first visit, and the second visit was a year and a half ago, again with Chris and Wade and Nadine and others, when we did the dialogue of declarations, and we came up with the Bukhara declarations, which is really was an event, and I see Imam Talib Sharif is here, he was with us as well. But we came up with the Bukhara declaration that was really emphasizing all the previous declaration that advanced religious freedom. But one of the, I want to just share with you a few points about the trip and my impression on all of that, and building on what Nadine has said, what Chris is saying here, and just few elements. Whenever I travel to a country, I always wanted to engage with the youth. So my first meeting in Tashkent was at the Islamic Academy. And then I had the formal meeting with the president of the academy, with the deputy of the Imams and all of that. And the meeting is over. So without any previous arrangements, I was walking out, they said, where is the library? I want to engage the youth. They said to me, the library is here. I told them, can I spend an hour with the youth? I will arrange it myself. I just talked to them randomly. So I saw three sisters standing there. I told them, introduce myself. I told them, can I talk to you? They said, yes, let's go to the library. We went to the library, and everybody is curious, you know. Somebody is here, want to talk to the youth. And I said, okay, all of you, you're welcome to have a conversation with me. And we had a discussion. I introduced myself, of course. I introduced the delegation, the mission, why we're in the country. And I told them that, you know, I want to talk to you. This is never arranged, you know, it's just random. Tell me, what do you know about religious freedom? Let's talk about it. Are you free to practice? You are wearing a scarf here. We talked about relationship. Do you have relationship with the Christian communities? What kind of relationship you have? Do you have any joint projects with Christian communities? So it's 19, 20 years, 22 years old youth. So they talked to me about all of these issues, and we discussed, and I told them that, that what we do in the United States, that what we do around the world, building relationship at this level is very critical. Engage with the Christian communities and people of other faith in social services projects, and all of that's going to strengthening your understanding. So we had really a good discussion. So one of the things that's really the takeaway from this, further engagement of youth and involvement of youth with a multi-faith kind of youth engagements is something that really we strongly recommend. Of course, whenever we say recommend, we always refer to the context, and there is a special context that is we need to respect in every country. The second point I want to make about religious education, and particularly focusing on the historical and the current context of the country, we have seen that. We visited Termiz, and we visited Imam al-Tirmizi Mosque, and there was a school there. Imam al-Tirmizi is well known in the Muslim world as one of the collectors of the hadith, actually, of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, very tolerant. So we visited with the Imam, and they took us as a tour to the building. So we went to the auditorium, and we found about 30, 40 Imams were studying. So I said, can I talk to you? Yeah. So I just zoomed in, and I went in front of the auditorium, and I talked to the Imam in Arabic. They were so happy, so pleased. I discussed with them in Arabic, I talked to them in Arabic. I appreciated what they do here. And then the tour continues, right? And they took us in another classroom, and I found about 6 or 7 young boys studying Quran. I asked them what chapter you are studying. They told me the chapter, and then we had a discussion also in Arabic about it. And I told them that this is the way we want to go. You want to study the Quran, you want to study the Hadith in your local context, and you have such an amazing history. The country has an amazing religious history. Not only the Islamic history, other religious history as well. And I told them, just focus on that, on your local context. When you do that, that's what we call it engaging theologically and interpretation of the text and scripture based on your own current practice and custom and tradition. I told them that will close the door for you for any kind of extremist views coming to you. So that's really something that's really well appreciated, that now the country is trying to produce what they call homegrown religious leaders and imams, which is really something that's very important, and we appreciate it so much. We also noticed that when we meet with pastors and other religious communities, I was really touched by visiting with Pentecostals communities. I was touched with visiting, and Nadine mentioned that, with Pastor Shukrat in the Baptist Church. So I asked Pastor Shukrat about the church, about the service. I think we were there on Saturday, I believe. I told him tomorrow is Sunday, can we come to the service? And Shukrat said, well, yes, you can come, but the church is not ready yet, particularly our senior believers, they cannot come, but they're working on renovation. So I said to him, Shukrat, I'm glad that you told me this. I want to share with you, during Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was visited by the Christian of Najran in his mosque. And then when the time for the prayer came, he gave them a section of the mosque to pray. So what do you think? I'm going to talk to the Imam of Bukhara, Imam Jabir. I know him from before. And tell Imam Jabir, can you accommodate the Baptist Christian communities to pray until their church is fixed? So the pastor said, whoa, this is this is something new you are bringing here. I said, well, I know it's going to be challenging, but let's talk about it. I'm just trying to bring an old tradition of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He allowed the Christian to pray in his mosque. Let's have that discussion. And guess what? Of course, I supposed to meet with the Imam. I didn't get a chance to meet with him, but definitely I will meet with him. But I brought the issue to the advisor to the president of Uzbekistan. Our ambassador in Tashkent basically invited us for a dinner. The advisor to the president, Kamilov, and he's also on relations, advisor to the president on relations with public and religious organizations, was there. The Mufti was there. A number of high officials, Mr. Usurf, Deputy Foreign Minister, was there, and the head of the Islamic Academy was there. So I brought the issue to Mr. Karimov. I told him, the advisor to the president, I told him, look, this is our impression, and this is something that we can do immediately, because I felt Pastor Shukarat was feeling that, I asked him, Pastor Shukarat, in my community, and I'm pretty sure it is true in the Christianity as well, the elderly people, they wanted to come to the church. I don't know how they feel that they are not able to go and worship. He said, well, I do my best, to go to their homes and do all of that to fill that spiritual need they need. But when I brought it up to the advisor to the president, I said, it's going to be a beautiful example to have the Christian worshiping in the mosque. And I told him the story that, in my office here in Washington, Friday I go to the Church of the Epiphany because they gave us a space to practice, to pray Friday. So the reaction from the advisor to the president said, well, we will do this and more. The point I'm making here, the officials of Uzbekistan today, they are open and willing to dialogue and willing to accommodate. I think that's the point you want to make. Yes, acknowledgement of some of the things that need improvement and clarifications, as mentioned by the dean, but I think we felt there is willingness and openness to talk and discuss a number of issues. Now, in closing, bringing you back to where I started. Probably everybody is wondering, what is your friend, right? My friend of Rashid, when we landed, I told my colleagues here, told them, okay, the first agenda in this is actually finding my friend Abdul Rashid. We never communicated since 2008, and I want to find him. He's the smartest Uzbek I never met. So the Uzbeks, with us helping us, said, what do you mean or not? I said, no, is in the university, he was A students in the dean list. So then I just asked everybody. So we met with the journalist without the government presence, and I told the journalist, I told him, I have a mission for you. I wanted to find my friend Rashid Ali. Give him, this is the name of his wife, the name of his daughters, and all of that, and he was with me this and studied that. He said to me, okay, I am on it. Guess what? He found him, and my friend was out of the country, and he immediately responded. He said, I'm coming back tomorrow and I will be in touch. And he contacted me, and I had basically the blessing of visiting him and his mother and his family in Tashkent. The point and connection to this, when I had a meeting or a tea with his mother wearing a scarf, and randomly, she didn't know. I mean, she knows me because we were very close, but she said, we're blessed now in this time. I went Hajj and I went to Umrah. This was impossible from before. This is her just general reaction. This is really to give you the indication. A simple, elderly woman was telling me that, praise to be to God, that, during this time I was able to do Hajj and able to practice my religion. And she was going on and on and on. So this is all to say that, Uzbekistan, I think it's the right direction, and the partnership, the multi-faith partnership, we felt that it is needed. When we talk to the pastors in the Pentecostals community or the Baptist community, and even the Shias, when we sat with them on the floor and talking and discussing, you can feel that they were so happy. You can see the joy, actually, that we are sitting with them and we're coming to them. So I think there is more opportunities for interreligious multi-faith delegations. I think this is the only way that we can empower the numerical minorities, as my brother Bishop Ingeles would always say, these are numerical minorities in numbers only. So with those visits, we definitely, so we are suggesting and coming up with many suggestions. I would like to see a national kind of interfaith event in Uzbekistan, national interfaith dinner. When we provide that platform, I think it is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. Now it's time for questions. If you have any questions, and I can take one question because we have passed our time designated to this panel. So, yeah, question in the front. Yeah.
Okay.
There is coming with the microphone.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for this discussion. I'm Nambahori Mamva from the Voice of America. I would like all of you to elaborate on some of the things that we heard from you. So we know that the security issues, security in general, is the number one factor in any discussion with the Uzbek government when it comes to religious freedom. And any steps that we define as a crackdown is a way, as far as they're concerned, a necessity to protect the secular system, to preserve the constitutional regime. And any conversation about religious freedom sort of ends there when they present that, argument. And the recommendations we just heard from you have been given to the Uzbek government before, many times. And I'm not, underrating your recommendations. I'm just saying that the Uzbek authorities have heard these recommendations before. Ease the registration, the definition of extremism, and other things, especially when it comes to improving or diversifying religious education. What makes you optimistic? What do you think is going to change now? We know that the Uzbek government is open for engagement, for discussing these issues, but what can possibly change from this point going forward?
I can maybe start. And,
Sure.
Just a few remarks on that. We not only provide suggestions at this point, working on recommendations, we also provide the way. So we already brought some partners that can actually able to implement with partnership with Uzbek government all these changes. And they have experience in other countries, in other areas, and it gives an understanding that it might be very successful. We're not only saying that it needs to be improved or whatever, modified. We together looking for the way and engaging people who could do that.
I think you put your finger right on the question. I have at least two reasons for hope. We'll see what else I think of while I'm answering. The first is this, and this is maybe the most important. anybody who has experience in the former Soviet space, there's a word in Russian, apparatchik, which means like a bureaucratic mindset, a Soviet mindset. You're going to do the least possible. You're just going to check the box and push people on, just to make the, as they would say in Vietnam, the barbarians happy. We're the barbarians because we always come and visit and ask these questions. And I've seen that mentality many times, even on this trip. But what gives me hope is that mentality is I think, fading. And the reason it's fading is because Muhammad's friend who was studying with him at the University of Indiana, among many others who have come to the West or gone to the great schools in Uzbekistan, Islamic State, University of World Economy and Diplomacy, they speak 4 or 5 languages to include English, and the next generation is tremendous. So I have a lot of hope in that regard. I also think that there is some openness to thinking about education. The educational establishment has been completely reorganized, and again, the 6-year process, something Karimov did to no effect. They've done it again, and I think I have some hope in how it's being done and how it's being implemented. But I think the key to that process, and this is a question that is very much on the table because we brought it up again and again, how do you, if you get radicalized at the age of 18 and higher, probably when you go off to be a migrant worker in Russia, who is helping you understand the faith from 1 to 18? Who is helping the parents understand that? How is it taught in the home? And there are different perspectives on whether that's possible or not. But it needs to be possible, and it needs to take place maybe through some form of systematic madrasas. That word has a negative connotation in our context because we think Taliban. But if you look at Indonesia, Matthias Ho is in the room someplace back there. We're part of a program that has educated 6,000 madrasa leaders to think about how faith and learning are integrated so that you can serve society. So there might be some possibilities there. And in terms of understanding what a Muslim-based, Islamic-based pluralism is, what does it mean to be a Muslim in this sphere of life, this sphere of life? I think those conversations are starting at the highest level, and that gives me great encouragement.
I mean, just very quickly, you've met several members of the civil society. You had those conversations. Those were outside of the official meetings. What was one thing that you heard from them across the country that you would definitely want the international community to hear, the Uzbek government to hear, something that needs to be addressed?
I think there was, as we've said, I'll say one thing we've said and one thing we haven't said. There was unanimity, and we're not making this up. It is infinitely better than it was before. Even though there are some complaints about, there's been 2 steps forward, now there's a step back. Everybody gets that. But I will also say this, they know they need to move forward. Absolutely 100%. And from what I hear from the government and today's comments and the government folks that I met over there, they want to move forward. And they understand there needs to be more transparency. That is my strong sense, and another reason for hope, incidentally. If it stays stationary, you're going to go to Afghanistan or Andishan. You're going to have a repressive regime through madrasas with too much extremism, or the government's going to choose to repress. And everybody understands that nobody wants that. Nobody wants those extremes of a bad worst-case scenario. So you have to move forward in the name of the nation.
Okay, I need to close the questions, Mohammed.
You need to close.
30 seconds.
So Nadine already, our colleague Nadine identified the 4 areas that need clarifications and improvement. Now, the challenge is that what would be the roadmap to do that improvement? And what gives me hope is that we discuss these things with the government, and they clearly committed. Even in that journey, in the ambassador residence, our ambassador residence, some of the government officials who are directly in charge of some of these areas, they said we'll do it. So that's really, that would give us hope as well. And they also, the Uzbek, they know the country is very rich, and this is something that I didn't get a chance to touch on, which is the religious tourism. Very rich in religious tourism. And this could be really, utilized, and is going to reflect also with resolving all of these issues. I mean, the stories are amazing. You have like a 1,000 years old Torah in Bukhara. You have the whole synagogue of Bukhara was built because of a Muslim Jewish woman, right? And it was, he said to the person who was building the Islamic madrasas, said, I am not moving. He said, why? She said, I need a synagogue. He said, I will build it for you. So the only synagogue in the complex of Islamic schools. So you have really rich history that need to be basically utilized. We also saw that we need a strong partnership. The pastors, the Christian religious leaders, and we met with them. They wanted a stronger relationship with the Imams. And I think this is an area that we need to improve.
Okay, thank you very much. We're just 32 minutes behind. And this panel, I'm sure we can continue discussion after we finish the second panel. So thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much, Mohammed. And we will quickly move into the second panel. And inviting the second panelist. Yes, please.